Hi, everybody, and welcome to the discussion. I am Brandon Meisner, the editor of D2Football.com. Thanks for watching. Since 2013, Matt Witwicki has been the columnist for the NSIC for D2Football.com and has done a great job in that time period. Last week, the NSIC had a great set of games, so we thought it was time to bring on Matt to talk about his conference and what's going on and what the future looks like for the NSIC. Well, we are 4 weeks into the regular season, and it looks like last week there was a great slate of games for you to cover, starting with Minnesota State's trip to Winona State.
Absolutely. Had three great games this last week in the Northern Sun. Had Minnesota State playing against Winona State. Top matchup right there in the conference. Winona State's winning for a good portion of the football game. Mankato comes on back at the end. Finds a way to win and stay undefeated, and of course on top of our polls as well.
I was watching the Minnesota State-Winona State game, and right before the half, Minnesota State muffed a punt. The Maverick defense was able to hold Winona State to a field goal attempt, which they missed. I thought that was a turning point in the game, and what is your analysis of that?
Well, especially how hard-charging Winona State was in that first half. It looked like they had a chance to really get some distance in that game. And I think by the fact that they didn't allow the Mavs to come on back a little bit and show the kind of resolve that they have as one of the top teams, frankly.
You live in Sioux Falls, and your hometown featured one of the best games in the NSIC last week. Augustana played Sioux Falls, and unlike when most of the times when these two teams meet, this one was a blowout.
Yeah, what's odd is I went in and attended the game. As I have for all of those games when it's here in town. For me, it's a 10-minute drive. Augustana at Kirkby Over Stadium, fantastic environment. About 7,000 small college football fans coming to watch the game. Nice stadium, everything. And Sioux Falls just really got on them early. It was 24-3 before you know it. And then all of a sudden they're up to 37 points at halftime. And everyone kind of thought that Augustana might make a little bit of a run in the second half of that football game. But USF was able to continue to run the football, and basically we're just able to kind of continue on. And the only lopsided win so far in that key to the city series that they've been playing since 2012 now.
The third game I was able to watch was an entertaining game between Bemidji State and Minnesota Duluth, and that one actually went to overtime.
Yeah, it was kind of the sleeper game of the day. It was a late game. I think a lot of people had kind of forgotten about it because of the fact that there was a lot of shine on the Winona Minnesota State game. And when taking a look at it, Bemidji was up late in that football game and had a chance to win it. Then Duluth misses a few chip shot field goals. Looks like they might give away the game. And then Duluth ends up winning in the end in a game where they're clearly the two best teams in the North Division of the Northern Sun.
Well, again, we are 4 weeks through the regular season, and you have divided all 16 teams in the NSIC into 4 different categories. Could you share those with us?
Yeah, taking a look at the entire body of work, basically for the first month, more or less. I've looked at the first 4 games, obviously, looking at the conference weekly, watching a lot of these teams, being able to, the nice thing with the Northern Sun is I can go ahead and if you've got a Roku device or something similar, you can see any of the games on demand, basically. So I get a chance to catch up with a lot of these football games if I'm not able to see them live on a Saturday, which is a great option. So with all that said, if I take a look, I've got what I consider like a top tier. And in looking at that top tier, I've got 4 squads in that group. And the first team there I do have is Mankato. The second team I have is Duluth. The third team, University of Sioux Falls. And then fourth, I've got Bemidji State. So I've got 2-2 right now. And I'm not trying to strive for balance here between those two, but that's just kind of where we're at right now at this point after about 1 month.
In Tier 2, you listed those as teams that could potentially make bowl games. Winona State and Concordia St. Paul are those 2 teams. Winona State was highly regarded coming into the season. Is their place on Tier 2 simply a matter of the Upper Iowa loss and the fact that they've lost 2 games now?
Well, I think Winona's in a tough spot right now, and the reason that they are is because if you take a look, they've lost essentially they've had injuries to 3 of their 4 captains. So they've got a few guys who, frankly, are out missing for the year. Nick Pridgeon, probably their best defensive player, is out for the season. That's a huge loss for them. He's a 2-year captain. And this football team isn't doing enough offensively to make it look like that they're going to run away from some of the mid-level teams. So as we're taking a look at it right now, they lost to Upper Iowa a few weeks ago. Upper Iowa's first win of the season in week 3, going in. So that's not a real good loss right there. Certainly they lose to Mankato last week, which frankly most teams in the country would. So I'm not really looking at that very much. But they've got football games coming up, for example, with Duluth, in a matter of a few weeks. Then they've also got other teams like Concordia St. Paul, Augustana still on the schedule. So right now, Winona, I think, is going to be in a real hard spot to look at the playoffs because of the injuries that they have on this football team. They're pretty young defensively right now otherwise, and they still have some pretty tough games left on their schedule.
Tier 3 is made up of teams you called unpredictable. Now, are they actually unpredictable, or does that just mean that there's a lot of parity amongst those teams?
Well, when I take a look at the list, because the Tier 3 group that we have, I essentially have in here, I've got teams like St. Cloud, I've got teams like Augustana. And when I take a look at just the starting point, and those are the first teams I have in that grouping, there's been weeks where they've looked very good. And there's already weeks where they've looked pretty bad. So these are the kind of teams that could potentially go up and get a team from Tier 2, but they could also be the kind of team that loses to some of the teams in the conference, like an Upper Iowa or a Wayne State, which are a little bit more towards the back end of the conference. So if I take a look, for example, at St. Cloud, their defense has played very well. Their offense has struggled with what should have been probably one of the better passing games in the conference. I take a look at Augustana. Augustana has been able to throw the ball well, especially in the Mankato game, but they've had some other challenges in the passing game outside of that. And their defense is just giving up too big a point totals right now for me to have them any higher up on the list.
Tier 4 is made up of teams at the bottom of the standings. It's Minot State, University of Minnesota Crookston, University of Mary. What do you think is the long-term prognosis for those teams?
Crookston last week, that was kind of the buzz for any of the Northern Sun people on Twitter was, hey, Crookston's winning a football game right now, which the reality of the situation is that they essentially haven't won a road game in 7 years. So when you really think about that, haven't won a road game in that long a time, that's a long time to not be successful on the road. So that all said, when they went ahead, when they put up 400 yards of offense against a Minot State team, that's first of all a real tough pill to swallow if you're Minot State, who thinks that they're improving the culture of their program and making positive steps. That's a tough one to swallow. But then furthermore, for Crookston, if we really take a look at them, they were able to get good quarterback play in that football game, completed 70% of their passes. I've already heard today on the radio, Augustana's coach Jerry Olszewski said they're preparing for Crookston this week, and he said that's the best Crookston team that he's seen on film in years. So it's apparent that they are taking some level of a step forward. Just how far a step we'll have to see. But mentioning the other teams, the Minot States and the Marys, both of them still going, through a culture change right now. Mary has got Craig Bagnell in his first year, youngest coach in NCAA, and they're moving from what was essentially a flex bone option offense, and now they're trying to make the best of that situation with the existing talent to go ahead and do a zone read type offense, which is a big change. So it's going to take them a little bit of time. They've got guys who played quarterback last year who are now playing tight end or playing on defense or receiver. And so they're still finding their way. I think that the Marys and the Minots will right themselves maybe before the season ends or maybe in the next year or two. Crookston is the one that's hard to see if they're going to be able to continue to win a few games, because in the last few seasons, a win has been real hard to come by.
Well, not every week can be filled with marquee games like last week's schedule. From an outsider's point of view, help us out. What is the best game to look for this week?
Well, if I take a look at the slate here, uh, probably the surprise team in the Northern Sun this year is Concordia St. Paul. I have them ranked right now. I believe I had them number 6 in my power rankings, and that's really high for them. And some Northern Sun fans may be surprised by that. But if you take a look at how they've taken care of business against teams not named Sioux Falls or Mankato, in a similar way, the way other mid-level teams have struggled to do that, I have to move them on up. And the fact that they competed like they did against Sioux Falls and probably could have won that football game, I'm now curious to see how they do this week at Duluth. Now, Duluth, of course, has been a fire-breathing dragon for a long time in the Northern Sun. But sometimes when some of the South Division teams play a Duluth or a Bemidji, they're able to challenge them a little bit because of the fact that they do play South teams all the time. And as you and I have talked about in the past, the South wins roughly 70% of the football games between those two when North and South Division teams play. And with that in mind, I'm expecting, as long as Concordia doesn't get too taken away with the fact that it says Duluth on the scoreboard when they get there, that they could actually go ahead and compete in that football game. So that's the one that comes to mind first. Then the next one, probably the most evenly matched game, would be Minnesota State Moorhead at Upper Iowa. A game that's probably not going to draw a ton of eyeballs, but at the same time, Upper Iowa plays fairly well down in Fayette. And if you're going from Moorhead, Minnesota, to Fayette, that's a pretty long trip. So I would expect Upper Iowa to be quite the challenge in that football game. And I think if you take a look at it, I would probably slightly favor them to win over a young Moorhead team that's currently 3-1.
Before the season started, Nate Gunn of Minnesota State would have been considered the favorite from the NSIC to be a Harlan Hill Trophy contender. But from what I understand, there might be somebody else joining him amongst the Harlan Hill talk.
Yeah, taking a look at the Northern Sun overall, in years past, you've seen quarterbacks from the Northern Sun, whether it was Trey Hyde from Augustana, whether it was Luke Papillion from the University of Sioux Falls, guys like that were able to be in that conversation. I don't really see the quarterback position producing that this season in the Northern Sun. Similar to last year, this just isn't as good a passing league as it was a few years ago. That said, if I take a look at the running back position, Gabe Watson for the University of Sioux Falls has really come on. And right now, I think he's less than 10 yards off of the Division II lead nationally for yards. He's over 100 yards each game so far this season, and has really given everyone trouble he's gone against, and is a guy that they're willing to feed 25 to 30 times a game. And he's doing a good job of finding the end zone. Last week against Augustana, he had 4 touchdowns in the first half, which set a record for Kirkby Over Stadium for the most touchdowns scored there by a player, period.
4 weeks into the season, can you make a prediction as to how all of this is going to turn out?
Well, taking a look at the rest of the schedule, and I've kind of looked it over with the remaining teams that are probably, let's say, that are in the first 2 tiers, because those are really the ones who are probably true contenders right now for the division title. I think Duluth's in a real good spot, given the fact that they have struggled with Mankato and both Sioux Falls in the last few years when they've had to play them. Well, this is one of those seasons where Duluth doesn't have to play those 2 teams. So right now, if you take a look at the South, their biggest challenge would be playing Winona, and they've already beaten their best challenger in the North itself, which is Bemidji State. So if you take a look at it, Duluth's on a real good track to probably go unbeaten. So it's kind of hard not to look at them right off the bat. Then if we take a look at Sioux Falls and essentially Mankato, Sioux Falls has 1 loss. Sioux Falls will go play at Mankato in Week 10. Sioux Falls is doing a much better job of mixing the run and pass than they did probably for the better part of this last, season or so. So if they are able to mix run and pass, Mankato's already shown that they can give up some yards through the air. Augustana threw for about 500 yards on them. So That would make for an interesting challenge when Sioux Falls goes and plays at Mankato Week 10. If Gabe Watson's still healthy, if the aforementioned Nate Gunn for Mankato is still a fantastic running back, if he's healthy, it would make for quite the marquee game. And at that point in time, I wouldn't be surprised if we're looking at a top 10 matchup. So those are the squads that I see right away. Sioux Falls does play at Bemidji next week. So Sioux Falls at Bemidji, that's a matchup of two teams in my top tier right there. So those would be the immediate teams I would see. One would have to favor Mankato and Duluth, both to go unbeaten still. And if they do, by the time those regional rankings were to come on out, it would be hard not to see those two teams no less than maybe 1-2, 2-3, something like that overall, which means that they're playing a home game at the very minimum.
That is Matt Witwicki. He is the great columnist for the NSIC for D2Football.com. We both appreciate you watching this video. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and don't be afraid to subscribe. Also, if you'd like to help us out, check in the description for how you can do so. We are the center of the D2 world. I am Brandon Meisner. Thanks for watching.